came to her planet for a quick pay, not knowing I would end up with 3 furry alien babies. The thought was a bitter cosmic joke that Kale kept replaying in his head, a mantra for the absolute clusterfuck his life had become. It had started, as all bad jobs do, with the promise of easy money. A simple retrieval. Snatch a data puck from some backwater cult on a jungle planet called Xylos. In and out in a standard cycle. The client paid half up front, enough to clear his debts and maybe even upgrade the rust bucket he called a ship. But Xylos wasn't just some backwater. It was a death trap wrapped in glowing, aggressively beautiful flora. He ditched his lander 3 clicks out, humping it through a jungle that felt alive in all the wrong ways. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and something sweet, like overripe fruit and hot metal. He checked his nav unit, the little green dot of his target blinking seductively from a cluster of what looked like enormous, interconnected trees. A hive city. Fucking fantastic. He pushed through a curtain of phosphorescent vines, stepping into a clearing that silenced the jungle's cacophony. It was a grove. The ground was carpeted in soft, pulsing moss, and at its center grew a clutch of flowers the size of his head. They were a deep, velvety purple, and with every slow, rhythmic pulse they released a shimmering cloud of gold dust into the air. Pollen. He should have put his helmet on. He knew better. But the air here felt different. Cleaner. He took a deep breath, the sweet scent filling his lungs. A mistake. A profound, life-altering mistake. A wave of heat washed through him, coiling in his gut like a hot snake. His skin prickled. The edges of his vision sharpened, the colors of the grove becoming painfully vivid. Every pulse of the flowers seemed to sync with his own heartbeat, which was suddenly hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "What the hell?" he muttered, taking a step back. His boots felt heavy, his muscles tight and humming with a strange, predatory energy. He felt strong, dangerous, and overwhelmingly, irrationally horny. It was a chemical spike, had to be. Some kind of local neurotoxin. He fumbled for the enviro-stim in his belt pouch, but his fingers were clumsy. Before he could inject the counteractant, a shadow detached itself from the canopy above. It landed without a sound, a phantom of coiled muscle and deadly grace. It was a female, tall, powerfully built, with skin the color of deep turquoise, overlaid with faint dark stripes that shimmered like oil on water. Long, messy black hair was woven with small, bone-like beads, and fell around a face that was all sharp angles and feral beauty. A pair of tufted feline ears swiveled atop her head, and a long, striped tail lashed the air behind her. She held a spear tipped with obsidian, leveled directly at his throat, but it was her eyes that seized him. They were molten gold, intelligent and utterly contemptuous. "You are stained," she said, her voice a low, rumbling purr that vibrated in his bones. Her gaze flicked from his face to the air around him, thick with the golden pollen. "You have inhaled the bloom of challenge." Kale forced a smirk, his usual defense mechanism kicking in despite the fire in his veins. "Lady, I just breathed some space pollen. If you have galactic allergies, that's on you. Now, if you'll just point me to the local dive bar, I'll be on my way." The alien warrior took a step closer, the tip of her spear dimpling the skin under his chin. He could smell her now, a scent of clean fur, rain-soaked earth, and a sharp, musky heat that made the fire in his gut roar. "You stand in the trial grove," she snarled. "You breathe the scent of a suitor, and you speak to me of tits?" She tilted her head, the word foreign and fascinating on her tongue. "Is that a formal declaration of your intent to dominate?" Kyle's brain stalled. "What? No, Look, it's just an expression." She pressed the spear harder. "Among my people, the Cathar, there are no just expressions in a trial grove. You have issued a challenge. I am Zilia, daughter of the hunt, and I accept." The heat in his body intensified, twisting from a general fever into a targeted, desperate need focused entirely on the creature in front of him. His body was betraying him, responding to her proximity, her dominance, her scent. "Oh, for fuck's sake," he breathed, his sarcasm cracking. "This is a misunderstanding." "There will be no misunderstanding when I am done with you, soft skin," Zelia purred, her golden eyes glowing with predatory promise. "The trial has begun." Zelia didn't kill him. She did something worse. She disarmed him with humiliating efficiency, a flick of her spear knocking his blaster from his hand, and a swift kick sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the mossy ground hard, the impact jarring his teeth. Before he could recover, she had him bound with a cord that felt like woven sinew, his hands tied tight behind his back. The fever from the pollen was getting worse, a dizzying, syrupy heat that made his thoughts slow and his body ache with a relentless, throbbing need. It was a biological imperative, a goddamn alien rut, and his system was screaming at him to either fight this woman or fuck her. Both options seemed equally likely to get him killed. "So this is the part where you sacrifice me to your tree gods, right?" Kale grunted as she hauled him to his feet. "Gonna get this over with quick?" Zelia let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. Death would be a mercy, off-worlder. You are not worthy of a swift end. You issued a challenge, now you will see it through. The trial does not end in death. It ends in submission. She yanked on the cord, forcing him to stumble after her as she moved back into the dense, bioluminescent jungle. He was a bounty hunter, a survivor. He'd broken out of Xandarian prison barges and escaped the gravity wells of collapsing stars. But being frog-marched through an alien forest by a catgirl princess because he'd accidentally sniffed a flower? That was a new low. "Look, my ship is just a few clicks that way," he tried, his voice strained. "There's a med kit. I can fix this. It's a chemical reaction, that's all." "It is a sacred bond, initiated," she corrected him, not even bothering to look back. Her striped tail twitched with irritation. "Your body understands what your clumsy tongue does not. It recognizes a superior mate. It begs for the conclusion of the ritual. My body wants a cheeseburger and a cheap synth ale," he shot back, stumbling over a root. "This is just my goddamn luck." They moved through the twilight jungle for what felt like hours. The giant trees formed a canopy so thick that the sky was just a memory. Everything was lit by the eerie glow of phosphorescent fungi and floating spore-like creatures that drifted on the humid air. The fever was making him hallucinate, the patterns on Zelia's skin seeming to shift and writhe. He was acutely aware of the sway of her hips, the powerful flex of her muscles under that striped fur, the musky scent that his traitorous body craved. Every part of him screamed to close the distance, to touch her. "You are quiet," she noted, glancing back at him. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce right through his skull. "Has the truth of your position finally settled in your soft, pink mind?" "I'm just enjoying the scenery, Whiskers," he rasped, the nickname slipping out. Her ears flattened against her skull. Her tail went rigid. She stopped dead, turning to face him so quickly he almost collided with her. "What did you call me?" "Whiskers." "You know," he gestured with his head, "the things on your face." She stared at him, her expression a mixture of fury and confusion. "Those are my Vlar. They sense shifts in the air, the emotions of prey. To name them is to claim a familiarity one must earn in combat or in the birthing den. Are you claiming such a right?" Here it was, another cultural landmine. "No shit, it's a term of endearment, a pet name." Zelia's eyes narrowed. "You wish for me to be your pet? Fuck no, that's not what it means. I like you, in a friendly way." Her lips peeled back from sharp white teeth. "There is nothing friendly about the trial, off-worlder. Do not mock our ways." She shoved him forward, harder this time. "You will learn respect." The heat in his blood was becoming unbearable. His skin felt too tight. He could feel her, an almost psychic pull. He knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that she felt it too. The air between them was electric, a space of pure animalistic tension. The hunter and the prey, except the lines were blurring with every shared feverish heartbeat. He was being dragged to his fate, and the worst part was, some deep primal part of him wanted to see what that fate was. The steady rhythmic pace of their trek was shattered by the high-pitched whine of a plasma bolt searing the air next to Kale's head. It struck a giant, pulsating fungus, which exploded in a shower of corrosive slime and acrid smoke. "Get down!" Kyle yelled, instinct taking over. He threw his weight sideways, tackling Zelia and sending them both tumbling behind the massive trunk of a glowing tree. The sinew cord bit into his wrists. but the adrenaline surge momentarily cleared the pheromonal fog from his brain. Zelia landed under him with a grunt, her body a tense coil of muscle. For a split second they were pressed together, chest to chest. He could feel the rapid thunder of her heart against his. The fever in his blood roared back to life, 10 times stronger, ignited by the sudden, violent intimacy. She shoved him off, her golden eyes blazing, not with the contempt from before, but with a new wild fire. "What was that?" she hissed, her claws extending from her fingertips and digging into the soft earth. Another plasma bolt slammed into their cover. Tree bark splintered, spraying them with glowing shrapnel. "Mercenaries," Kyle grunted, peering around the edge of the trunk. He saw 3 figures in battered enviro suits, advancing through the jungle, their weapons sweeping the area. Standard-issue Xenocorp blasters, hired guns. "They're not here for me," he said, the pieces clicking into place. "The bounty on that data puck wasn't high enough for a team this heavy. They're here for you." Celia's expression hardened. "The carrion eaters of the patriarchs. They seek to prevent my ascension. My father sends his pets to drag me back to the cage he designed for me. Patriarchs, daddy issues, story of my fucking life," Kale muttered. "Can you fight in this?" She gave him a look that could curdle milk. "I was born fighting." With a flick of her wrists, she snapped the cord binding his hands. The material was impossibly strong, but her claws were sharper. "You, soft skin, you are a liability." "I'm a liability with a plan," he countered, rubbing his chafed wrists. "They'll expect you to run or to face them head-on. They won't expect us." The word hung in the air between them. Us. Zelia's tail twitched, but she didn't object. The trial was temporarily on hold, superseded by the more immediate trial of survival. The mercs were closing in, their movements clumsy and loud in the alien jungle. "They move like crippled grazers," Zelia whispered, her hunter's instincts taking over. "Their armor is heavy, their senses are dull, but their guns will still turn us into a fine red mist," Kyle said. "I'll draw their fire. You take them out from the flank. Can you do that without your spear?" She held up her hands, flexing her claws. These were the first weapons of the Cathar. A savage grin spread across her face. It was terrifying, and it was the most attractive thing he had ever seen. "On my signal," he said, his voice low. He waited, counting the seconds, timing the merc's approach. The fever was still there, a low hum beneath the adrenaline, a constant reminder of the other battle waiting for them. But right now, it was fuel. "Now!" he yelled, breaking from cover and firing his holdout blaster. A pea shooter, really, but it made noise. The plasma bolts were meant to distract, not kill. The merc's attention snapped to him and they opened fire. Gale dove behind another tree as a volley of plasma bolts slagged the ground where he'd been standing. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a turquoise and black blur moving through the shadows. Zelia was impossibly fast, a wraith of silent death. The first merc went down with a wet gurgle, his throat opened by her claws. The second turned, shouting in alarm, just as Zelia launched herself off a tree trunk, her body a spinning engine of destruction. His scream was cut short. The third merc panicked, spraying plasma fire wildly into the jungle. Kyle took his chance. He burst from cover, closing the distance while the merc was disoriented. He slammed into the man, driving his shoulder into his chest. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Kale got his hands on the merc's blaster rifle, and the fight was over in a brutal, messy instant. Silence descended on the grove once more, broken only by their ragged breathing. Zelia stood over the bodies of the mercs, her fur bristling, her chest heaving. She was magnificent, primal. Kale got to his feet, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving the pheromonal heat to surge back in, stronger than ever. The immediate danger was gone, but the other, more complicated danger was standing right in front of him, covered in the blood of her enemies. And she was still looking at him like he was the main course. The victory did nothing to cool the air between them. If anything, the shared violence had only stoked the fire. The scent of blood mingled with the sweet, maddening pollen of the grove and the musky heat rolling off Zelia's body. It was a potent, intoxicating cocktail that was short-circuiting every rational thought in Kyle's head. His body was no longer his own. It was a vessel for this alien fever, this biological imperative that screamed one word: her. The patriarchs will send more, Zelia said, her voice a low growl. Her golden eyes were fixed on him, the pupils blown wide and dark. The hunter was back, but the prey she was stalking had changed. It wasn't the mercs anymore. It was him. We need to move. There's a hollow root system nearby. We can hide there until the spore light fades. Kyle just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Words were failing him. His vocabulary had been reduced to instinct and need. He followed her, his eyes locked on the sway of her tail, the ripple of muscle under her striped skin. Every movement was a promise and a threat. He was still a prisoner, not by a cord of sinew, but by his own biology. They found the hollow root system a few minutes later, a gaping maw in the base of a colossal, ancient tree. The entrance was shrouded in hanging moss that glowed with a faint blue light. Inside, it was a tight, confined space, the air thick and still. It smelled of damp earth and something else, her. The moment they were inside, the enclosed space seemed to amplify the tension 100-fold. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to look but at each other. "We wait here," she said, her voice huskier than before. She stood with her back to the curved wall of the root, her arms crossed over her chest. It was a defensive posture, but it did nothing to hide the tremor in her hands or the rapid rise and fall of her chest. "Fine by me," Kyle managed to say, his own voice sounding rough and unfamiliar. He leaned against the opposite wall, the cool, damp wood a stark contrast to the fire raging under his skin. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He could hear his own blood pounding in his ears. He could feel the fever cresting, a wave of heat that made him feel lightheaded and reckless. His sarcasm, his last line of defense, had crumbled to dust. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth of the situation. "This is your fault," he finally bit out, the accusation a weak shield against the overwhelming pull. Zelia's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "My fault? You were the one who trespassed, the one who breathed the air of a challenger, like a witless pup stumbling into a predator's den." "I didn't know," he shot back, pushing off the wall. He took a step toward her, then another. The space between them shrank until it was almost non-existent. "I was just doing a job. I didn't ask for this. This, whatever the hell this is. It is the Cathar way," she snarled, her own control fracturing, her claws flexed, digging into her own arms. "It is the proving, the bond, the continuation of the bloodline. You may be an ignorant soft skin, but your body knows. It knows it is in the presence of its superior. It yields. Yields," he laughed, a harsh, ragged sound. "Lady, the only thing I'm yielding to right now is the urge to either strangle you or throw you against this wall." A flicker of something that looked like fear, or maybe excitement, crossed her face. "Is that another of your soft-skin threats? Another misinterpretation of our sacred right?" "It's not a misinterpretation," he growled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He was so close now he could feel the heat radiating from her body, see the pulse hammering in her throat. "It's a fucking promise." He was done fighting it, done trying to rationalize it. The pheromones, the danger, the woman in front of him, it was a perfect storm, and he was at its center. He was tired of being dragged, tired of reacting. If he was going to be consumed by this madness, he would at least meet it on his feet. "You said the trial ends in submission," he breathed, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. "Whose?" Celia's breath hitched, her golden eyes locked with his, and in their depths he saw the same fever, the same desperate, raging fire that was consuming him. Her dominance, her warrior pride, was cracking under the weight of a biological imperative that was older and more powerful than any cultural law. "You started this, soft skin," she whispered, her voice a broken growl. Her tail coiled around his leg, a possessive, involuntary gesture. He closed the last inch of space between them, his hand cupping her jaw. Her skin was hot, the short fur like velvet over steel. "Then let's fucking finish it." The first touch was an explosion, a dam breaking. All the coiled tension, the feverish need, the rage and the fear and the unwilling lust, it all erupted in a single violent instant. Kale's mouth crashed down on hers. Not a kiss, but a collision, a battle for dominance fought with teeth and tongue. She met him with equal force, her claws digging into his shoulders, her body arching against his. It wasn't seduction, it was combat. They slammed against the curved wall of the root hollow, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. He pinned her there, his body pressing her into the damp wood, his hands tangled in her coarse, wild hair. For a moment, he had her. He was in control. It was a fleeting, foolish thought. With a guttural snarl, Zelia twisted, her strength astonishing. She hooked a leg behind his and flipped them, the world turning on its axis until his back hit the ground, and she was on top of him, straddling his hips. Her weight was a solid, intoxicating presence. She was the predator. He was the prey. The trial was back on. Her golden eyes burned down at him full of savage triumph. "You see, soft skin?" she panted, her face inches from his. "The Cathar always dominate." "We'll see about that," he grunted, and bucked his hips, trying to unseat her. It was useless. She was an immovable, perfect weight. She laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated through his entire body. She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. "The trial requires a struggle. It proves the strength of the victor. Fight me. Show me you are worthy of being claimed." And so he fought. He twisted, he grappled, he used every dirty trick he knew. But it was like wrestling with a force of nature. She was stronger, faster, her body a perfectly honed weapon. Their fight was a frantic, desperate dance in the confined space. Clothes were torn away, fabric ripping under the strain. His shirt, her leather harness, skin met skin, his pale, scarred flesh against her turquoise-striped fur. The contact was electric. The fever in his blood, which he thought couldn't get any hotter, spiked into a white-hot nova. Their struggle became less about winning and more about touch. His hands roamed her body, learning the hard planes of her muscles, the surprising softness of the fur on her stomach. Her claws, which could have flayed him open, instead traced fiery patterns across his chest, leaving shallow, stinging scratches that only heightened the delirious haze of pain and pleasure. This was her world, her rules, her ritual. He was just a participant, swept away by a current he couldn't hope to fight. Surrender was inevitable. And in that moment, he found he didn't care. He wanted this, he wanted her. He stopped fighting, his body going slack beneath her. He looked up at her, his chest heaving, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Submission. Zelia's eyes widened. She had won. But the look on her face wasn't just triumph. It was something else. Awe. Hunger. A raw, possessive need that mirrored his own. Her movements gentled, her dominance shifting from combative to carnal. She leaned down and kissed him again. And this time there was no fight, only fire. It was a kiss of claiming, of ownership. Her hands explored his body with an unnerving intimacy, as if memorizing him, mapping him. The air grew thick, charged with their ragged breaths and the scent of their mingled sweat and arousal. She guided him, positioned him, her body moving with a ritualistic grace that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He was lost, drowning in sensation, in her. The world narrowed to the confines of the hollow root, to the feeling of her powerful body moving against his, the sight of her wild, beautiful face above him, her golden eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to look straight into his soul. This wasn't sex as he knew it. It was a rite, a branding, a complete and total consumption of one by the other. And as she drove them both toward the edge, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would never be the same again. He was being remade in the image of her desire. The world shattered into a million points of light. The climax was a cataclysm, a white-hot wave that obliterated thought, leaving only raw, pure sensation. Kyle cried out, his body arching off the ground, every muscle locked tight. He was a live wire, a conduit for a pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. Through the blinding haze, he saw Zelia throw her head back, a guttural cry torn from her throat, a sound of both savage victory and exquisite release. Her body convulsed on top of his, a perfect shuddering echo of his own release. And then, in the final cresting moment of the wave, she lunged down. Her sharp white teeth sank into the flesh of his shoulder, just above the collarbone. It wasn't a love bite, it was a brand. The pain was sharp, electric, cutting through the pleasure with blinding clarity. He yelled, a raw sound of shock and agony. The bite was deep, decisive. He felt a hot trickle of blood run down his chest. As quickly as it happened, it was over. The pain subsided to a deep rhythmic throb. The pheromonal fever, the all-consuming heat that had ruled him for hours, vanished. It was like a switch had been flipped. The fire was extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, stark reality of what they had just done. Zelia pulled back, her lips stained with his blood. She released his shoulder, her breathing ragged. She looked down at him, her golden eyes wide, the haze of passion replaced by a dawning, complex emotion he couldn't decipher. It looked like a mixture of triumph, shock, and something that might have been regret. She touched the wound on his shoulder with a trembling fingertip. The skin around the bite mark was already beginning to change, the flesh knitting together in a strange, swirling pattern, like a dark, permanent tattoo. "It is done," she whispered, her voice hoarse and stripped of its earlier command. "The trial is complete. You are marked." Kyle stared up at her, his mind struggling to catch up. The world came rushing back in, the damp smell of the root hollow, the sticky sweat on his skin, the throbbing pain in his shoulder. The madness was gone, and its absence was terrifying. You fucking bit me," he said, the words feeling stupid and inadequate. He pushed himself up on his elbows, his body feeling strangely weak, hollowed out. He looked down at his shoulder. The mark was dark and intricate, a spiral of raised scar tissue that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. It felt alive. "It is the claiming mark," Zelia explained, her voice quiet. She scrambled off him, pulling the tattered remains of her harness around her chest. A sudden, uncharacteristic gesture of modesty. "It is the final act of the trial. The victor marks the vanquished. It binds us." "Binds us?" Kyle sat up fully, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his shoulder. "What the hell does that mean?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the mark on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. "It means, I feel you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your presence, your fear, your anger. It is a resonance, a tether. Where you go, I will feel you. What you feel, I will know. The bond is absolute." He stared at her, the full weight of her words crashing down on him. This wasn't a one-night stand driven by alien hormones. This wasn't a mistake he could walk away from. The ritual was real. The consequences were permanent. She hadn't just had sex with him. She had branded him, owned him. He was no longer just Kale, a jaded bounty hunter trying to make a score. He was hers. The thought was so alien, so violating, it made him nauseous. He had come to this planet for a quick payday, a simple, impersonal transaction. And now he was psychically tethered to a warrior cat princess who had literally marked him as her property. The silence in the root hollow was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own blood roaring in his ears. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just a dominant alien warrior, but a woman who seemed just as stunned by the outcome as he was. The trial was over, but the real trouble, he suspected, had only just begun. The walk back to her city was a study in tense, suffocating silence. The easy, combative banter was gone, replaced by a chasm of awkward, irreversible intimacy. Kyle was acutely aware of the thrumming mark on his shoulder, and the bizarre new sense that came with it. It was like a background hum in his mind, a constant low-level awareness of Zelia's presence beside him. He could feel the turmoil rolling off her in waves, pride, anxiety, and a deep, resonant uncertainty that mirrored his own. He was furious. He felt violated, tricked by his own body and her alien customs. He wanted to yell, to rage, to demand she undo what she'd done. But what was the point? The mark was a physical fact, a swirling dark brand on his skin, and worse, a part of him. A tiny, traitorous part felt the connection too, a strange sense of not belonging but of being anchored. It was infuriating. "So this is it then?" He finally broke the silence, his voice tight with restrained anger. "I'm your… what? Your pet rock? Your walking, talking trophy?" Zelia flinched, her ears flattening. "You are my chosen," she said, the ritualistic term sounding hollow now. "You survived the trial. You were strong. The mark is a symbol of that strength. It is an honor. It's a fucking brand, Xylia. You branded me like cattle. Cattle do not fight back, she shot back, a flicker of her old fire returning. Cattle do not help you slay your enemies. You are not cattle, Kale. She used his name for the first time. It landed strangely, a mark of a different kind. Before he could process it, they emerged from the jungle and into the open. The Cathar city was breathtaking. It wasn't a hive so much as a cathedral grown from living wood. Massive trees woven together into spiraling towers and graceful, arching bridges, all glowing with the same soft, internal bioluminescence. But the beauty was lost on Kale as Cathar warriors, all tall, feline, and heavily armed, emerged from the archways, their golden eyes fixing on the two of them. On him, specifically, on the raw, new mark visible on his shoulder. A murmur went through the crowd, a low, rumbling wave of shock and disbelief. An elder, his fur streaked with gray and his face a mask of stern disapproval, stepped forward. He was huge, even larger than Xylia, and carried a staff of gnarled black wood. "Xylia," the elder boomed, his voice echoing in the vast open space. "You were to be retrieved, not to engage in this. You have brought a stained, unmarked offworlder into our sacred grove and performed the rite with him." His gaze swept over Kyle with undisguised disgust. Xylia stood tall, her chin lifted, but Kyle could feel the tremor of her anxiety through their new, unwanted bond. He saw her vulnerability, the weight of her people's judgment pressing down on her. She was a warrior, a princess, but she was also cornered. "He did not enter the grove-stained elder boar," Xylia announced, her voice ringing with forced confidence. "He was chosen by the bloom itself. He survived the challenge. He fought with honor against the patriarch's assassins. He has been claimed. The right is valid." Boar laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Honor? This soft skin knows nothing of honor. He is a mistake, an impurity. The bond must be severed. He will be cast out and you will face the council for this disgrace." Kyle watched as Xylia's face fell. He saw the trap closing around her. She had followed her culture, her biology, and now that same culture was about to punish her for it. And he, the cause of it all, was about to be thrown to the wolves. A hot spike of anger, fierce and protective, shot through him. It wasn't his fight. It wasn't his world. But that mark on his shoulder, that goddamn brand, said otherwise. It tethered him to her fate. "Hey, Gandalf," Kale said, stepping forward. All eyes snapped to him. "You got a problem with me?" Boar sneered. "You have no voice here, offworlder." "The hell I don't," Kyle said, walking right up to the massive elder until he was standing toe-to-toe with him. He jabbed a thumb at the mark on his shoulder. "She says this is a mark of honor, a symbol of strength. Are you saying the sacred rite of the Cathar produces garbage? Are you calling your own traditions a lie?" The elder was speechless, his jaw working silently. "She followed your rules," Kale pressed on, his voice low and dangerous. "She fought, she won, she claimed her prize. According to her, I'm hers now. So if you have a problem with me, you have a problem with her victory. You have a problem with your own laws." He let the words hang in the air. He could feel Xylia's shock, and then a wave of something else, a fierce, soaring pride. It washed over him, warm and intoxicating. He looked back at her and saw it reflected in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as prey or a mistake or a piece of property. She was looking at him as an equal, as her partner. In that moment, standing against the judgment of her entire people, they weren't a victor and her vanquished. They were a united front. The confrontation with Elder Boar shifted everything. Kyle's defiance, his unexpected defense of the ritual, and by extension, of her, had sent ripples of confusion through the assembled Cathar. He hadn't acted like a vanquished subordinate. He'd acted like a partner. It was a concept so foreign to their dominance-based culture that it left the elders sputtering. Boar, unable to refute the twisted logic that Kyle had thrown in his face without undermining their most sacred traditions, had retreated with a snarl, promising the matter would be settled by the High Council. This bought them time. Xylia led Kyle through the glowing arboreal city to her personal quarters, a high-flung chamber carved into the heart of a massive, pulsating tree. The air inside was warm and smelled of her, a scent that was no longer a trigger for a chemical fever, but was becoming something comforting. The chamber was sparse, decorated with weapons, hunting trophies, and simple woven mats. It was a warrior's room, not a princess's. "You surprised me, soft skin," Zelia said, her back to him as she examined a rack of ceremonial blades. "You spoke with the tongue of a challenger, not a thrall." "Yeah, well, I don't do thrall very well," Kyle replied, gingerly touching the mark on his shoulder. It had settled into a dull, constant ache. "Besides, that old bastard was going to have you exiled and me fed to whatever giant pissed-off animals you keep around here. Seemed like a good time to speak up." She turned, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "You defended my honor." "I defended my ass," he corrected, though they both knew it was more than that. The bond between them hummed, a conduit for unspoken understanding. He had felt her fear, her desperation. Protecting her had been as instinctual as breathing. "The patriarchs will not be pleased," she said, her expression growing serious. "My father, the High Patriarch, arranged a bonding for me with the son of another clan, a political alliance. My actions have shattered that." "Good. Sounds like the guy was a dick." Zelia's ears twitched. "He is, but this will be seen as an act of rebellion. They will not let it stand. The mercs were just the beginning. They will send a legion if they must." "Let them come," Kale said, the words feeling surprisingly natural. A month ago, he would have been halfway to the galactic core, credits in his pocket, not giving a damn. Now he had a stake. A weird, painful, psychically linked stake, but a stake nonetheless. "We fought off 3 of them. We can fight off more." "Not alone," she said. She crossed the room and stood before him, her golden eyes searching his. "The bond, the claiming mark. It has other properties. When a chosen is marked under duress, in a time of great threat, it can be amplified." "Stronger? Stronger how?" he asked, wary. "It allows for a true joining, a sharing of strengths, of skills. I can feel your aptitude for tactics, for technology. It is a faint echo in my mind. And you must be able to feel my connection to the hunt, to this world." He thought about it. The way he'd known exactly when to break from cover. How he'd felt her movements during the fight with the mercs almost before she'd made them. It was more than just observation. It was resonance. "I can teach you to harness it," she continued, her voice intense. "And you can teach me your ways. Together, we would be more than the sum of our parts. We could be strong enough to defy the council, to defy my father." It was a crazy plan, utterly insane. He was a bounty hunter, not a revolutionary. He chased credits, not causes. But looking at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes, and feeling the steady, reassuring hum of the bond between them, he found he couldn't say no. His life as a lone wolf was over, had been over the moment he breathed in that goddamn pollen. His path was now inextricably tied to hers. "All right, Whiskers," he said, a weary but genuine smile touching his lips. "Looks like you've got yourself a partner. What's the first lesson? How to properly sharpen my claws." She didn't laugh, but the warmth he felt from her through the bond was better than any laugh. It was acceptance. It was respect. "The first lesson," she said, her voice a low purr as she reached out and gently traced the mark on his shoulder, "is learning that this is no longer just your skin. It is ours." The next few weeks were a blur of intense, grueling training. Kyle had thought he was a seasoned fighter, but the Cathar way was something else entirely. Zelia taught him to move with the silence of a predator, to use the jungle as both weapon and shield, to feel the world through the bond, anticipating an enemy's move before it was made. In turn, he taught her the dirty, underhanded tactics of a human mercenary. He showed her how to sabotage enemy tech, how to set explosive traps, how to use psychological warfare to unravel a disciplined squad. They became a terrifyingly efficient unit, their skills complementing each other perfectly. The bond between them deepened from a strange anomaly into an essential tool, and then, without either of them acknowledging it, into something more. The sarcastic barbs and defiant posturing softened into a familiar, comfortable banter. He learned her moments of quiet doubt. She learned about the guilt-driven past that had made him the jaded man he was. They were no longer just partners in survival. They were friends, confidants. The council, swayed by Bohr's political maneuvering, eventually delivered its verdict. Zelia was stripped of her title as Daughter of the Hunt. The bond was declared unsanctioned, and Kale was marked for purification, a death sentence. But they were ready. When the temple guards came for them, they weren't there. They had already melted into the deep jungle, fugitives in their own land. Living on the run was hard, but it was also freeing. Away from the judging eyes of her people, Zelia seemed lighter. The weight of her royal duties was gone. With Kale, she could be just Zelia, a fierce, intelligent, and surprisingly witty warrior. The threat of her father's legions was a constant shadow, but in the quiet moments, huddled together by a small fire under the glow of the giant alien moon, they found a strange sort of peace. One evening, after a particularly close call with a patrol, they were camped in a high-altitude cave overlooking the glowing canopy. Zelia was uncharacteristically quiet, her hand resting on her lower abdomen. "You're worried," Kale said. It wasn't a question. He could feel her anxiety like a cold stone in his own gut. "The bond," she began, her voice hesitant. "There are legends, old stories about its effects, when the trial is triggered by an off-worlder, when the claiming is so potent." "Potent?" Kale raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it now?" A faint smile touched her lips. "The joining of two such different biologies under the influence of the bloom. It can result in an accelerated genesis." "Genesis? You're going to have to use smaller words, princess." She finally looked at him, her golden eyes wide and full of a terrifying, wondrous light. "I am pregnant, Kale." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Pregnant." He stared at her, then at her hand on her stomach. His mind went blank. All he could hear was the crackling of the fire and the blood pounding in his ears. "Pregnant. And the legends say," she continued softly, "that such a union does not produce a single offspring. The vitality is amplified. It will be a litter, likely three furry alien babies." The thought, the very one that had been the mantra of his new insane life, came crashing back into his mind with the force of a freighter collision. He looked at Zelia, at her strong, beautiful face, and he didn't feel the panic or the rage he expected. He didn't feel trapped. He felt a sudden, fierce, and overwhelming wave of protectiveness that dwarfed anything he had ever felt before. He saw their future, not as fugitives, but as a family. A strange, mismatched, hunted family. He let out a long, slow breath and a laugh escaped him. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief at the sheer absurdity of the universe. "Three," he finally managed to say, shaking his head. "We're going to need a bigger cave." Zelia's answering smile was brilliant, lighting up the dim cavern. The fear in her was gone, replaced by the same fierce joy that was blooming in his own chest. He moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. He was no longer Kale, the jaded bounty hunter. He was a mate, a partner, a soon-to-be father of three. He had come to this planet for a handful of credits, a quick and dirty job. He'd lost his ship, his career, and every semblance of his old life. But as he sat there with his alien warrior mate by his side, and the impossible promise of a family on the way, he knew he had gotten the better end of the deal. He had found something worth infinitely more.